some examples of actually what this sustainable lending in practice really means. What are some of those stories? What are some of the fab things that have been actually achieved on the ground and the difference that has been made? We're really pleased we've got 3 great speakers again for you. We've got Chris Pyke from 5 Rivers Cohousing. Say hello, Chris. And the recipient, I understand from Gareth's speech earlier, of the largest ever ecology mortgage. Is that right? Did I get that right? Or did
yeah, you got that right, Jack.
Yeah, thank you. There we go. So you're the one who's had the biggest amount of money. Be very pleased about that. We also have with us Ele George. Say hello, Elle. Elle's a self-build borrower, and she's a sustainable construction specialist. We're going to come as well in a minute. And we also have with us Gisela Renolds. Say hello, Gisela. Hi. Gisela's from the Global Link Education Centre in Lancaster, and she's going to talk to us about their work as well. But Elle, if we could come to you first. You are, as I was saying, you're a former ecology self-build borrower. You borrowed it obviously for a self-build project. But you're also a sustainable construction specialist. You've got your own consultancy, Elevate. You're an engineer by background, and you have a passion for innovative technologies and processes with a current focus on promoting the industrialised retrofit sector. So you're going to show us a few slides. Over to you, Elle.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to talk about some reflections following my borrowing process. And about the project, and then also about what I did next. So about me, people tell me that I'm an early adopter. I definitely love technology, and as an innovator and an optimist, I think you've got to be optimistic to work in the field that we do, otherwise you'd be getting pretty depressed. But like a lot of self-builders, I went on a bit of a journey, and afterwards I was sort of opened up a lot of opportunities for me, so I was very grateful for that. So before I tell you more about my self-build, I just want to say a little bit about one of the sidelines I do as a day job is about campaigning for greater representation of women in the construction sector or more diversity. And I believe that diverse teams give better outcomes for everybody. So a quick quote from Margaret Mead, who was an American anthropologist: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And I really like this quote because when I feel despair about the lack of progress that we're making, it gives me a bit more optimism that we are making changes, and I think the tide's turning, and there's quite a big tide, and we are actually changing things for the better now. And one more quick quote. I read The Lorax to my son again this week. And if you're not familiar with it, what happens is that the Lorax begs the onceler to stop chopping down the truffle trees. And he begs, and then eventually they're all gone and it's too late. And I feel like there's quite a lot of us that have been saying for quite a long time that we need to build differently. But I think we are starting to do that now, so I'm quite grateful for that. So, my self-build, we bought the site in 2011, and we got full planning permission 1 year later. Sorry, my notes are different to what I was expecting. And then obviously being self-build, I got immediately pregnant. And then we started to put the foundations down, and then that was a couple of months, then we had a 6-month gap, I won't bore you why, problems with the contract, and then we spent 6 months building the superstructure. And then we went on a couple of holidays, which I think were well deserved. One of the ways we were able to get it finished quite so quickly is because we were involved in a TV programme called Building the Dream, or as we like to call it, Poor Man's Grand Designs. And then you can see in the middle picture, maybe you can just about make it out, that I'm 7 months pregnant, just as the superstructure was being craned in, and we had a toddler in tow, he's on the right there. So it's a pretty busy time, but we're really happy that we went through the process, and regardless of the stress involved, I'm desperate to do another project. The site was actually located on a brownfield site. You can see in the images, it's about, well, you probably can't tell, but it's about 0.15 of an acre, and we're very lucky that we are backing onto fields. And this one gives you a bit of an idea of the process. So from the strip foundations on the top left, we had a reinforced insulated slab, followed by, I think it was 2 or 3 lorries of 2D off-site constructed panels. So bearing in mind this is 10 years ago, I think we were quite forward-thinking in what we were doing. I'll say we, I was really doing it, my husband was funding it, so anyway. The panels had the windows already in and the doors, and so after 2 or 3 days the structure was watertight, other than some large windows at the front which we needed to put in. One of my really key priorities, and touching on what the question earlier about materials, it was really important that the responsible sourcing for every single aspect was really considered. So we had structurally insulated timber panels, or SIPs as they're known. We used recycled concrete tiles. Inside the worktops from recycled glass. Throughout the ground floor we've got bamboo flooring, and we've even got gin bottles which were made into lights. And in terms of water, just to touch on the gentleman's comment earlier, we've got a recycled water tank which flushes the toilets and for washing clothes. Unfortunately the pump's broken, so that isn't so good. But technology-wise, we've got an MVHR, which is mechanical ventilation heat recovery, and that's providing fresh air and water, hot water, and we only have heat from 4 towel rails because the installation is very high level, so we don't need much supplementary heating. We've also got a 4 kilowatt array of solar panels, and then a couple of, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, we put in a home battery and an EV charging point, so we're very much future-proofed. It's all electric, so we're off gas. We've also got some far infrared heating, which is the image at the top right-hand side there. So that's really only needed on the very coldest of days. So we probably turn it on for a couple of days a year, and 1 year we didn't need it at all. So, a couple of pictures of the finished build.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you. We call it Brock House. Brock's medieval term for badger, which is a funny thing. Anyway, it's nearly 10 years old now, which is unbelievable really, so it's not a new home. And in fact, we're thinking about giving it a fresh lick of paint. So, what happened next? Well, after I completed the self-build, I was still on maternity leave, so unfortunately I was placed at risk of redundancy. So I had about 10 years experience in the construction sector. I wasn't quite sure what to do. I'd worked in mostly commercial projects like schools and hospitals. But I felt really privileged to live in an eco-home, so I knew that not many other people had access to that, which is upsetting. So I wanted to play a part in showing how sustainable housing shouldn't be just a nice to have, but that everybody should have access to that. So after a lot of uncertainty and I was unemployed for a while, I found myself a job with a property developer and I worked in residential-led schemes. And then after a little while I went on to do some work with some social housing landlord, and then I moved into what Dan referred to earlier, volumetric construction. So I worked for a house manufacturer for a little while. And then I got a little bit sick of answering to middle-aged white men, so I decided to set up on my own. I started my own consultancy, and now most of my clients are looking to implement modern methods of construction, and given I've done it, I've got first-hand experience, but I also really care about more people building this way. As was mentioned in my intro, I'm working for Energy Sprong mostly, which is looking to industrialise retrofit, so building components in factories that can accelerate the quality and the scale and pace of retrofit. So, finishing off, it feels quite arrogant to quote myself, but I just really think that poor quality housing is the cause of a lot of problems, and if we had good quality housing, then there'd be, it provides a lot of solutions. And I think what we should be doing is addressing some of the problems we've got in housing by using systems thinking approach. And what I mean is that the housing sector is a wicked problem, and wicked problems are ones that have complex interdependencies. We can't solve the problems in isolation. Problems like cold, damp, and healthy homes, and someone referred to our Bishak earlier, the young lad who died because of mould in his home. And that's causing a huge strain on the NHS, and it's costing billions. And problems like unaffordable energy bills and that we're burning too many fossil fuels. And we're claiming that our buildings are net zero, but we've not considered the embodied carbon, and I could go on. So what I'm working on now is more about systems thinking, approach to housing, and I'm pleased that Ecology are really embracing systems thinking approaches. And you might have heard of Mark Farmer, and he said we need to modernise or die, and that's using things like modern methods of construction, off-site manufacturing, making sure that we're ready for electrification of the grid, thinking about interoperability of parts and manufacturing components, and making sure that we're closing the performance gap, which other people have already referred to, and having digital twins so that humans are interacting with the data that we've got about buildings. And I probably should finish up because I've probably gone on a bit too long. I don't think we've got time to talk about the global goals, but look them up if you're not aware. So just to finish, we don't need to wait, we need to get on with it. There's so many technologies that we employed at Brock House that were in their infancy, and there were so few passive house designers when we did this as well. But now it's really becoming quite mainstream, and we've already got so many of the solutions that we need, so just crack on. That's it, thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, that was great. Thank you very much. What an inspiration. I mean, it was more fantastic every time you walk in your house and just go, oh God, I did this.
Initially it was a bit of a shock and couldn't quite believe it, but then now it's just normal.
Yeah, but it goes to show, we can do this.
Yeah, and the process of borrowing from Ecology really sounds a bit cheesy, but it did change everything for me, because I was able to fulfill a lot of people who have the dream to self-build. I was able to fulfill it, and then because of the experience I was able to get a role that was much more suited to my aspirations and try and unlock that same dream for other people.
Absolutely, I mean we see that a lot in there's so many areas where people decide to do things for themselves that it actually leads on. Yeah, that's gone off a bit there. Leads on to career changes as well. Chris, let's come to you next. Let me introduce you first. You're Chris Pyke. You're a founding member of Five Rivers Co-Housing Scheme in Sheffield.
That's right.
You originally started life as an FE lecturer, but you've been involved in two rural self-supporting communes in Yorkshire, and now obviously with Five Rivers Co-Housing. After lecturing, you went on to work for many years with woodcraft folk, and in your spare time you enjoyed dancing, singing and writing. I know you're going to show us some pictures in a minute of Five Rivers, but before you do, can I just start, because some people may not be sure exactly what co-housing is. We've heard Community Land Trust mentioned quite a few times, community-led housing. Just very quickly, tell people so everyone knows what co-housing scheme is.
We've heard about sustainability, and we're talking about sustainable materials, sustainable building methods and so on. If we want humanity to keep going, we've got to have sustainable ways of living, sustainable ways of living in our communities. Co-housing is a means of downsizing, as a colleague of ours mentioned earlier, is something very important. People come together because they like to live together. We've lived in the nuclear family model for 25, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe only that. It's been very short-lived. It's an absolute failure. We very much need to have models of how else we might live. They exist all over the world. You don't need to be an anthropologist to know that. And the co-housing movement has grown in the last 10 to 15 years considerably. I know EBS has already funded some co-housing schemes, and with the current loan to us, that's the largest loan that they've ever made. It's £2.9 million for 2 years. That's a development mortgage, effectively, in order for us to get a scheme off the ground in Sheffield, which I will show you.
Please do go ahead and show.
I can go ahead.
Yeah. So just when you're getting through to the slides, sorry, this microphone keeps cutting out. I'm doing really well on microphones. Sorry, this afternoon I'm here. Co-housing schemes generally they will all be different. They're different financial models. as to how they're actually financed. Different ones will work in different ways, but generally everybody has their own home. It's not necessarily communal living, but it's intentional community-based living of people who choose to live in there. But there probably will be shared facilities and shared resources as part of it, and commitments that you make when you're part of the co-housing scheme.
Correct, Peg, thank you. Yeah, a very typical way of describing it is having your own front door. It's living in a community but having your own front door. And Five Rivers formed a company in 2012. People have been talking before that without the name Five Rivers. And in the time till we came across a piece of land here that we're building on, was called Spider Park. It still is called Spider Park. Its name's going to change when we move in. It's in North Sheffield. By the time we got to this piece of land, we had actively engaged with 10 different sites across Sheffield in those 10 years. Nearly all council sites, but not entirely, and had not succeeded in buying or optioning any of those sites. So it was a long haul, and that's been the case for most co-housing groups. That it's taken typical lead-in time to get anywhere near being on the ground is 10 years. So it's a long process, and we got older as we did it. And the group that's got the co-housing off the ground is we are empty nester, baby boomer, housing boom. We've profited from the housing boom. We're retired. We've got time to put into this stuff. That's why it's not a surprise that quite a lot of the co-housing schemes are in fact for elders and senior citizens. Lovely model, works very well. But it was always, thinking sustainability, it was always our aim in Five Rivers to create a scheme that was multi-generational, had a range of different sorts of properties in it, and in moving to do that, we had to work out how we were going to finance this. We had a lucky break in a way. We just had a scheme with Guinness Northern counties. We worked with two housing associations over the years to try and move in on part of developments they were doing in Sheffield. They were very, very interested, but the complexities were beyond us and them to make it work so far. And one of those had just collapsed when we went back to an old site that we'd looked at before. It's not particularly big, it's about 1.5 acres, on an old playing field, or existing playing field in the north of Sheffield. And it had been put up for sale 8 years ago, something like that, when Sheffield sold a lot of land. Sheffield doesn't sell its land freehold, it sells it long leases, not that long leases, 200 years. Makes quite a lot of the negotiations we've had to do very, very difficult, that we're not freeholders. And the company, and they are a timber frame specialist company, they're not dealing fully with SIPs, they're not the full integrated systems, but they're called Oakworth Homes, they're Sheffield based, so the factory where the timber frame units and the other sections that they're able to create in the factory are moving at a relatively short distance to get to one side of Sheffield to the other for this scheme, and they mainly build in that area in North Notts and Derbyshire. They haven't gone far outside that range. They had an option on the land to put 12 detached homes on it, creating like a gated community. They hadn't got very far. Our Guinness Northern Counties scheme fell through. One of our members went back and knocked on their door, having noticed that they had a planning application approved, but there was no sort of work going on. And they said, well, we are rethinking this. And so we put our proposal to them, and they said, well, let's have a look at it. And it's taken us about 1.5 years since then to work through changing their scheme, not changing it that much in some ways, just changing what were going to be 12 at the most detached houses on a similar layout on a fairly tight piece of land, and we've turned that into a scheme that got planning approval and is now...
Yeah, do you want to show us through some of the pictures, Chris, just because we'll need to move on so we can see...
This is what the architect came up with. That's our north view as you approach it. There's a block of flats to the left, there's a range of houses, There's a common house with a differently shaped roof there. There's another range of houses, and then there's another range of houses at an angle coming off that. We have 22 units and quite a large common house. The 22 units are a mix of flats and houses, ranging from 50 square metres up to 90 square metres. The build work started in, but it broke ground. That breaking ground picture was in December. This was by about a month and a half, 2 months ago. We were up this stage. This is the block of flats going up. That's the common house. That's a fairly recent picture. That they're working in phases through the build, that's us leaving the site, going off to the local cafe, which is a community cafe. Part of what we think about the sustainability and making sure that things like this work is, as I say, that we want to be multi-generational. So although it was a group of more elderly people who set it up in the first place, our members, and we now have something like 35 members and 5 children who are not old enough to be members yet because they're young children, and we have integrated with the community as far as we can. There was certainly some objections to our building on this part of a recreation ground, but part of the recreation ground remains, and the land swap the council was doing that enabled them to sell it for housing meant that a park got built about a quarter of a mile away on another piece of ground. I'll stop at that.
Great, brilliant, thank you, fantastic work. Great, thank you. Fantastic work. When do you expect that you'll be moving in?
The contract with the builders, that's a £3.4 million build contract, is scheduled to be finished in the contract by the end of February. They expect it to be, the soonest they said it might be by the end of September.
Of course, it could be quite soon.
These systems, as other people who've spoken earlier will know, go up pretty fast. It's a fast build, which is a decided advantage in the British weather.
Absolutely, so it could be very soon.
So it could be we're thinking October. But that's put the younger people who are looking for mortgages under pressure to get those mortgages in time. And will they get those mortgages? As we've heard earlier, that's not always that easy for this sort of build. And those of us who are selling houses have got to sell them to people who are ready to wait till we move in order to...
So a few challenges to get through yet, but you're on the way.
Yeah.
Are you able just to pass that, because we're just sharing mics there. Thank you, Chris. And just to say, if anybody wants to find out more about co-housing, I know earlier in Gareth's talk, he mentioned also Chaco, where they've moved in at the moment. That's the one just up the road in Leeds. If you go onto the iPlayer, BBC iPlayer, and I think it's called One Big Build, 33 Families, or 33 Families, One Big Build. There is a documentary on there about Chaco and about the scheme that they've done, which is very similar to yours, so do have a look. Thank you for that, really, really inspiring. We're going to slightly change emphasis now because Gisela Renolds is from the Global Link Education Centre, so we're going to look at a different type of project that Ecology has been able to support. Gisela, you have a passionate commitment to make the world a better place for both people and the planet. And so since 2002, you've developed this organisation in Lancaster, Global Link, into a community heritage project that's addressing all sorts of issues: social justice, diversity, human rights, and now very much is an asylum seeker and refugees support and cohesion organisation. So tell us a bit about Global Link and about how you've been working with Ecology and about the work that you're doing around asylum seekers and refugees.
I'll start with a little bit of background actually. Before we did any work with refugees and asylum seekers, we are primarily a development education centre. So we were set up in 1993. There was a big network of development education centres around the country, including DEP in Manchester, and our core purpose was educating young people and adults around global issues, interdependence, sustainability, human rights, diversity. So that's always been core to our practice. but funding for that kind of global education work dried up. Around the same time as I started feeling like actually we've got beyond educating people. People know about climate change now. People know what we need to do. And so some of our work now is still around climate change, but it's actually, taking action. So we're involved in local food poverty, food growing and consumption projects locally. But the big change came for us in 2015 when Lancaster became a dispersal area for asylum seekers and refugees. I should say Lancaster was one of the places that had the first cohousing project. So you'll know about that. And some of our trustees live at the Lancaster Cohousing. And some of our ex-trustees are here today. Global Link has been a member of the Ecology Building Society since, 20, 30 years. But this year we borrowed money because we, basically the work in Lancaster supporting asylum seekers and refugees has grown for us. We do very little education work now because the needs locally to help asylum seekers and refugees have grown. We now, from having no asylum seekers in Lancaster in 2015, we now have over 400, and we have maybe 200 to 300 refugees in Lancaster. So part of the work over the last few years has been supporting people to integrate, to learn English, to develop their skills, to find work, to get access to lawyers, to support them with their asylum claims. And as we've grown as an organisation, and where we were based in the YMCA, was clearly a fragile place. We realised we were going to be needed for a very long time, and there's a lot of skills and energy within the asylum seeker refugee community. So we wanted to have a space where refugees and asylum seekers could also develop their own projects and share some of their own skills. And so during the pandemic, we decided we wanted to buy our own building. And because of our own commitment to sustainability, we wanted to make that as sustainable as possible. It took us a few years, so we put in a couple of offers on buildings. In the meantime, the price of buildings went through the roof. We almost gave up because it looked like we weren't going to be able to afford anything. And then in last year, about just around this time last year, a local supporter, we heard she was going to be selling her residential house. So we've ended up buying it directly from her at about 60 to 100,000 pounds below the market price. So it's just a gift. But it was still very expensive for us. We applied for planning permission to transform it from a residential building into a community building. And we took ownership of it at the end of December. And we are now open and operating, not completely, out of the building. It's been a challenge more from the point of view of turning it into a community building to make it meet building regulations and fire regulations, and the sort of tensions between that and conservation, because it's a listed building, we're in a conservation area. So that's been a challenge and cost a lot more than we were anticipating. And we've tried to retrofit it as best we can. So it's a 200-year-old Georgian building, so we've lime and hemp insulated it. One of the challenges has been finding people to do the work. So there was only one lime and hemp insulator we could find in the northwest of England. And so we've tried to do as much retrofitting as possible. And there's still some work to do, but we're really excited we're in the building now, and yeah.
Do you think other lenders would have lent you the money? Or is it a case that this sort of, you know, because if ecology wasn't there, this centre wouldn't be there?
I actually don't know. I think that's probably the case, but I can't answer that completely honestly. When we embarked on the process in 2020, we did go to the co-op bank because we also bank with the co-op, and the co-op were awkward about it at that time. And so then we went to the Ecology Building Society, and they said yes. So we didn't actually try anybody else.
No, but yeah, please, thanks for being honest with that. I think it's a good question to pose. Thank you for that. Really inspiring what you've been doing, and also I think it's really inspiring seeing organisations that are able to flex and shift and change when the world around you changes, to not go, this is what we are, this is what we do, but to say, right, it's time that we have to reflect to that. Can I ask, is there any questions that anybody would like to ask any of this panel? Oh, yes.
Yeah, I've got a question. What about how inspiring is it if people can actually visit these places? It's lovely to see all these pictures, but I mean, like here we are in a people say you can't insulate and draft the old bill and make it into a nice, cosy meeting space. Well, obviously you can. And likewise, I've been to a place in Manchester in Everett Road where they've got an old Victorian terrace house which has been retrofitted. People say you can't retrofit these old Victorian terrace houses. They just leak energy like anything. And yet they have, and it's a housing block and stuff like that. And going inside and seeing how cosy it is can really inspire people. I wonder if you were inspired by things like that you've seen before.
I went to Open House, is it called, in London. I went to a few schools and a few houses, and that inspired me to do my project. But I've got a plan, you know, what I did next. What I'm trying to do next is I want to buy another site, and I want to retrofit, and I want to demonstrate modular buildings on the site. But the plan is for people to come and see it, so it won't be residential, it will be somewhere people can come and stay, learn about these buildings, learn about how it feels, how it looks, and hopefully that will provide inspiration for more and more people to undertake these projects. So I 100% agree that you need to touch it, feel it, and understand how the building works. So totally agree with you.
Are you going to have a load of open days, Chris, as well? Because I know, for example, Lilac, which many of you may have heard of, which was well, not the first, obviously, because there's Lancaster and there's, what's it called, Pyke, somewhere down near Cheltenham. But Lilac, they regularly do open days, don't they, where they invite people in to look?
It's difficult to think about open days. I mean, you can't... You struggle to get on the site at the moment because the builders, not surprisingly, are following regulations, and it's hard hats and access only when allowed. We know that will happen. If we are going to make a success of this, and already there's people asking us, how are you doing that? And they'll want to come and see the sorts of environmental compromises we've had to make. It has to be compromised all the way through. We hold wonderful ideals, and there are things that absolutely have to be done, as we talked about earlier today, to do with global warming and how to combat it in our housing. But we have to make compromises all the time, and you'll come and see some of our compromises maybe when we've done that.
In Lancaster for the last few years, I'm not sure if it happened this year, during Big Green Week, which is in September, there's regularly been tours of Lancaster, so there's been a weekend, an open homes weekend, where I opened my home as well, because we did a lot of work on our home. Lancaster Cohousing is open, so you can actually, there's like 20 houses you can go around and visit in Lancaster, so that's a model, but anybody can run anywhere.
That's the holiday started then.
It's not so much a question or a comment, but people are aware of the Super Homes Network, which is very much about the principle of actually looking around homes or retrofitters. And in the past, they've actually held periods of time when people could actually book tours of people as part of the network. They stopped doing that for a little while, but I understand that there are now plans to actually reinstate that, which is actually making a very strong point that you are able to see exactly the sort of compromises that have to be made and the things that didn't work well, without any of the sort of baggage that comes with people with an interest in selling something.
What did you say it was called again?
It's called Super Homes Network.
Super Homes Network.
Superhomes.org.
There we go. go, superhomes.org, if anybody wants to check that out. Brilliant. Time for one more question or comment.
Just a comment, if I may. 2 points. One, the Superhomes network, yeah, absolutely part of the National Energy Foundation, and they do have these groups, and they have a process where you can follow your retrofit through that as well, so you can plan your retrofit. But the look and feel and actually kicking the tyres and finding out what's happened with people, absolutely necessary. And I think that the time really is right for more and more examples. I was Milton Keynes based for quite a long time. There was Home World there, then Energy World. Then in 1994, I built a house at Future Build, which was Future World, which was a insulated panel house in 94. And then we had people coming around and looking at all of that. And it really does help, and it takes a long time.
Okay.
Can I just say Centre for Alternative Technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Wales.
Yeah.
Fantastic house open day, accessible by train.
Any more?
What we could do with a list.
Yeah, we could do. Any more suggestions of places to go and visit?
House open day.
Dan?
No, I had a question actually.
Okay, is it quick?
Well, yeah, don't want to.
All right, okay.
We're out of time.
Power to people.
Sorry?
Power to people.
Is that a network or will you just kind of...
It's called Power to People. It's an organisation that's about collectivising,
brilliant, thank
bringing
you.
people together to get cheaper energy.
So Power to People, Superhomes Network, National Energy...
Well, the Superhomes, yeah.
Okay, what we should do...
Sorry, Power for People, I'll just be corrected.
Okay, Power for People. Then we can, thank you, we can pull together that list. Very quickly, anything you want to finish off by saying, anything you'd like to add?
We got, I think it was 1% off our mortgage through Ecology because we had an A-rated home, and I really feel like there should be a lot more incentivisation to build in a green way, and these financial mechanisms are massively needed and they're not really out there, so power to Ecology for doing it, but please more of it.
Anything to finish off on, Chris?
Yeah, we're working for a high B rating, not A. It would have put the cost beyond most of us to have made it an A rating. But in fact, we'll probably reach A rating by the time we put solar panels on the roofs and things like that.
Finish off with?
I'm not sure, probably just an awareness that there's still a tension between conservation and environmental improvements to buildings. We've experienced that, but I know in conservation areas, certainly in Lancaster, the planning officers, for example, have refused planning permission for solar panels on roofs, although that's been successfully challenged. I just think that's an area, a legal area, that probably needs addressing as well.
Right, well listen, can we say thank you to this panel? Thank you for being here. Thank you. So these are speakers. We're going to have a little break now. Tea coffee, we're going to stay up here and we're going to start back again at 3:15. But you know, Elle, I really liked your quotes that you had in your presentation. I love the fact you finished on a quote from yourself, I have to say. I thought it was really good. And I thought, oh, can I finish on a quote? Anyway, I've decided to finish this bit on a quote from my old dad, he's not been with us for a long time, but he was an architectural historian and writer on architecture and an architect. He ended up with two famous quotes. One, which was, he said on national telly, I have 8 or 9 children. He did actually say that. To be fair, he wasn't...
It wasn't Boris Johnson, was it?
No, he wasn't, no. At the time, he was actually in the process of adopting my brother, who was 16. So there was actually a reason for it. It was a great thing to say on national telly, I have 8 or 9 children. Yeah, one of his other quotes, this is about architects, but I think I was thinking about it when you were using your quotes, and I do think it sums up a lot of what we've heard here today. And that is that the job of the modern architect is the same as the job of us all. It is to make out of the ordinary something out of the ordinary. So I think that's quite a nice thing to leave us on, which is what you've all been doing. We're going to have a quick break, 15 minutes, and then we're going to come back, we're going to think about the future, about agitating for change.